Dracula has arrived. Dracula is looking to be reborn ever since his castle was destroyed as a result of his battle with Christopher. "15 years later, a ceremony is held honoring Soleil, the son of Christopher, who will be the next vampire hunter. Dracula has been waiting for this time, because in order to return to Earth, he must use the power of Soleil. The next day, 4 castles appear, while Soleil disappears into the fog. And now, a new battle must begin. It hasn't been that long since we covered the last one, and we're a little late for Halloween, but you know what? Screw it. Hello everyone, and welcome to Let's Play Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge, the direct sequel to Castlevania The Adventure, which was a launch-era Game Boy game. So, starting off, we actually got something a little unusual for Castlevania games, an outright stage select from the start. You can tackle any of the 4 main levels in any order you want. I'm going with the order that the cursor immediately selects, though, as while there's not really a difficulty curve there, it's a good enough starting point, really. And we're starting off over in the Crystal Castle, which is actually a little bit of a rarity among the starting levels, in that it's the only one where you have to travel left rather than right. So starting off, let's talk about the game's controls. Christopher has gotten noticeably faster here in Belmont's Revenge, and he has a much better jump arc as well. He feels a lot less stiff, although he's still got the trademark Belmont stiffness in his jump, just so it's consistent with the series. Notably, we now actually have hearts as hearts, though, rather than being a health pickup, as Castlevania Belmont's Revenge actually has sub-weapons. With that said, there are only 2 of them. But which 2 they are depends on your region. Over here in the US, for instance, here we have the axe, which works as it does in the other mainline games. You press up and B to use a heart to throw an axe upwards in an arc that has a pretty good range to it. But over in Japan and Europe, instead, this is the cross boomerang, which functions as it does in the other games. You throw a boomerang forwards that then comes back. Both of these have moments where they're honestly better than the other, but I find the fact that you can only get one or the other depending on your region weird. I'm assuming it's due to censorship stuff by using the cross in some form, blah, blah, blah. The other sub-weapon is consistent depending on version, though. The other one is always the Holy Water, which as usual, I throw it at the ground, it lingers for a little bit, can do some pretty good damage and stun enemies in boss fights. There are times you're going to want one or the other, but both are ultimately still useful and do a lot to actually flesh out how this game feels compared to the original Game Boy Castlevania. Another change from the previous game is the whip mechanics. In the first game, whenever Christopher gained a level up for his whip, if you took a hit, you would lose that level up. That's still in the game, but it's been changed greatly. I forget the exact math of it, but it takes either a very heavy hit, like from certain boss fights, or several hits to lose a level. And even then, I think you can only lose the level that causes your whip to fire out a projectile. On top of that, the level design here in this game is just a lot better in terms of the comfortability of everything, on top of just the placement of things. Because the adventure had a lot of moments, especially in the first level and the final level, where the jumps weren't quite pixel perfect, but every time you make them, they still feel uncomfortable. This game maybe has at most maybe 1 or 2 of those across its much higher level count. There's also more hidden extras like this, so they often, instead of leading to health, lead to just hearts or a sub-weapon. And in this game, they actually do have the hidden wild chicken that allows you to heal, because that was basically completely absent in the last one. I know where very few of them are in this game, but I think every level has at least 1. Before I get back to that topic, though, we don't have many stairs in this game, unlike the console games. Instead, we have ropes, but they added something to this game from the last one. You can hold down the attack button, and you can then just descend the rope rapidly, which is the only way to make it through these sections without getting hit, or you can just get greedy and get hit anyway, like I did just there. Handy change, although it can actually throw you off how fast you descend when you do that on a first playthrough. I know it threw me off a lot. Now, me not knowing where a lot of the wall made in this game largely comes down to one fact, and it's general lack of playing the game. I think I've beaten this game maybe 4 times in total over the years. And while I think it's an underappreciated game in the series on the whole, if I'm going to reach for a classic Mania, I'm going to reach for like Rondo of Blood 3 or 4, rather than any of the 3 on the Game Boy, if that makes sense. For right now, though, we actually have a split path in this level, which is another very good indication of how much more interesting this game's level design is. Each pathway, either up or down, has a different focus from a mechanic we've already seen earlier in the stage. Going up here, we're going to deal with the ice blocks we saw earlier, where the longer you're on them, the closer they get to shattering until they do. This is technically the more dangerous path in my experience, because there is more of a bottomless pit threat, but I just prefer dealing with it because I feel like I get through it faster. Down below, you gotta deal with the water currents we saw at the start of the stage, which will push you one direction, but then eventually swap in most cases. But that's so you can just jump past them, and you'll be completely fine. After you finish either of these routes, you're pretty much at the end of the level. There's like one more room after that. But down here, though, we're actually gonna have a new enemy type. This is a Fornius. These enemies are interesting in that hitting them doesn't drain Christopher of his health, it drains you of your hearts. Which, honestly, in some regards can be a little more punishing given how good some sub-weapons are against some boss fights. But through that door will get us to the boss area, but not the boss fight itself. This game does take a little bit of something out of, specifically Rondo of Blood, in that when you reach near the end of the stage, you get one last platforming segment that will actively have a music shift, which, honestly, for atmosphere and tension, I really like this. In fact, the song even reminds me a lot of the song from Rondo of Blood. I mean, a lot less ear-grating, because that pre-boss theme in Rondo is like one of my few songs in that game I don't really like. And wouldn't you know, it's one of the few that's actually made by the system and not via the CD audio. For now, though, time for the boss of the Crystal Castle. This is Darkside. I can best compare Darkside to a Wizrobe from some of the Zelda games, in that they're a teleporting wizard. They'll teleport all over the screen, and when they are fully materialized, they'll cause lightning to rain down from the storm cloud above. Notably, I believe you can completely dodge that by just staying on either extreme edge of the screen. Notably, though, Darkside himself is completely invincible unless you hit them during the crystal phase of their teleportation across the screen. So you do need to be kind of proactive in attacking him in that regard, but ultimately, because it's only a one-note attack that you can easily avoid, not too much to worry about. Notably, though, the lightning bolt itself will hurt, as will the little radiating waves outside of it when it strikes the ground. So watch out for that, but you can just jump over the energy wave in the case you're trying to get closer to Darkside to do damage here and again. Very easy boss. It's actually the main reason I go for this stage first, as I think it's got a good difficulty curve both in terms of the stage and boss fight. And afterwards, our score is tabulated, and I don't think there's a way to skip this unless I just didn't press a certain button while doing this. And from here, we're going to move on to our next stage, which the auto-highlighting of the cursor brings us over to the rock castle on the bottom right of the stage select. So, the game brought these castles up in the intro, but to say the game's actual intro is relatively vague and brief is an understatement, so let's read what's going on in the game's plot according to the manual. Starting off, thanks for the memories. Starting with a pun, I approve. In the first Castlevania adventure, the fearless vampire hunter Christopher Belmont fought toe-to-toe and whip-to-wing against the vampire king, Count Dracula. Notably, they are, again, differentiating this is Christopher Belmont, not Simon Belmont like the first game's manual said. Belmont defeated the Count and destroyed his castle, but unfortunately, Dracula used what remained of his magical powers to transform his body into mist, thereby making good his escape. As the ending kind of foreshadowed. However, his powers were so depleted that he was left unable to transform back into human form. The Count decided to wait and rebuild his dark forces. Deep inside his black heart, he swore revenge against Christopher Belmont and his family. 15 years later, a ceremony was held in the town of Transylvania. The son of Christopher Belmont, Soleil Belmont, had come of age, and it was time for the title of Vampire Hunter to be passed down to him. The ceremony was to commemorate the occasion. All the citizens of Transylvania rejoiced, hoping that the father-son team of vampire hunters would bring peace to the region forever. Notably, to look at the game really quick, we're actually seeing the boss fight from the second stage of the previous game now used as normal enemies, and they're a lot more annoying because they act much more like fleamen here because they'll have more of a chance to jump at you. Also, Soleil Belmont, in the in-game intro and the manual refers to him as Soleil. That's just a mistranslation. It's meant to be the French word soleil, which directly translates to sun, which, given the whole sun and vampires thing, is pretty on the nose. Going back to the manual story, though, but on the morning after the ceremony, it was discovered that Soleil Belmont had vanished into thin air. The ceremony was the chance Dracula had waited for. Soleil received great sacred power in the ceremony to mark his adulthood, and Dracula used his last bit of magic to turn Soleil's powers against him, transforming him into a terrible demon. Then, aided by the Soleil demon, Dracula was able to assume human form once again. That evening, to the northeast of the village, the earth shook with a thunderous roar, and 4 ominous castles appeared. And hidden in a lake at the center of these castles was another castle, the new lair of Count Dracula. Horrified to learn that his son had been altered by the forces of evil, Christopher Belmont determined to save Soleil and break the ambitions of the Count. He journeyed to the new castles, each ruled by a different power of darkness placed there by the Soleil demon to stop anyone who would tamper with the mystic spell Dracula had cast upon him. Nevertheless, in order to save the village of Transylvania and free his son, Christopher had no choice but to go and fight once again. I'd say it's a pretty good storytelling upgrade over the previous game's manual for a fact. So this stage, outside of the returning boss fight from the previous game as a normal enemy, mechanically it's got a couple of things going on. It's got the spikes that will jut out and become platforms for you, but you need to be careful otherwise you'll get impaled by them, like from the previous game. But it also has screens like this. The way these screens work is that the candles themselves serve a secondary purpose. Yes, they'll have hearts and all that in them, but if there's not a candle on screen, the cave will darken. And if that happens, the little rock enemies that we saw there will actively unfurl and start rolling against you. And I think they might be invincible, otherwise I just have barely attempted to actually attack them because I'd rather just get around them. On top of that, there's one other mechanic to deal with here in that there's going to be a spike chandelier, like in the previous game, actually. The spikes aren't insta-kill, they just really hurt. But like a certain spiked ceiling that was lowering, or I guess the floor was raising technically in that case, in the previous game, you can actually make the chandelier not a threat. The chandelier has a threaded chain that it's connected to connect it to the ceiling. You can attack that and destroy it to make the chandelier just fall flat and use it as a platform from there. And you can do that to make this area just in generally less threatening. But I just prefer to go underneath it in this case because it's just a little bit faster, I think. But I like that the game has the options like that. Again, this is honestly a much improved sequel. I wish most sequels had improvement like this. Also, you saw me do it earlier, but I was too busy reading the manual story. This stage also has an active shortcut through a specific wall to skip a specific screen. That screen isn't too annoying, but I like that they give you the shortcut anyway to skip on the climbing back up, mostly. I like when games have little hidden shortcuts like that, as at times, god dang it E as they are to find. This specific enemy, by the way, is really annoying. They just jump and throw knives at 2 specific angles, but trying to just dodge past them and ignore them is actively really hard to do because the angles they throw those knives at and their speed is high enough that, well, you're gonna have trouble with it. For now, though, it's time for the boss fight of the Rock Castle, which, if you remember the previous game, is gonna be a little familiar looking. This is the Iron Doll. This gigantic knight will swing its sword down at a pretty good angle. You gotta be a little far away to dodge it, but you can do it all the same. At halfway through its health, though, it changes to a thinner gargoyle-like state, in which case it'll start jumping and doing swords that have actual energy slashes. It'll do some fake-out jumps that only go about half as far, but you still need to be wary of the range of the sword here, because it does a lot of damage, considering it's a boss fight. But at the same time, because it's relatively slow, you can get damage in on it pretty quickly. And that's the Rock Castle completed. 2 castles down, 2 to go. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're going to take care of the other 2 castles before starting off our endgame journey. See you guys then.